Hi there. I'm MikariaDrake, your CosMom, and today I thought we would talk about fabric. It's kind of something I'm super obsessed with, and when I got into sewing, I found that I was just really drawn to learning about different types of fabric, how to use different types of fabric, and like the best fabrics for different things. And it's just kind of spiraled out of control there for a while, but I do wanted to talk a little bit about the different kinds of fabrics and how to find the right fabric for your cosplay. So when you're starting out, especially if you're a first-time sewer, the range of fabrics that are available is insane. Um, Unfortunately, like we're losing Joanne, so it's sometimes harder to find those fabrics locally, but I really do suggest finding fabric locally because it's so much easier to buy fabric by knowing what it feels like and what it looks like in light and how it drapes, which is um, how it falls off of your body or off of the design. Um, I love that we got a comment that they're so excited when they're notified that we're streaming, and that makes me so happy. I'm glad. um, so we're gonna start out just talking about fabric in general. So there's uh, different kinds of weaves, and then there's different kinds of fabric. And so a weave is how the fabric is made. So that's like your satin, twill, those sort of things. And then there's the kind of material it's made out of. So there's silk satins, there's, cotton twills, wool twills, things like that. So when we talk about fabrics, you might hear me reference uh, the kind of fabric versus the weave, and I wanted to make that clear. And if you would like to impress judges at competitions, know your fabric and the weave because it makes you sound like you actually know what you're talking about when it comes to fabrics, which judges really love. So just know that if you're working with a satin, there's also a kind of material that that satin is made out of. It's polyester satin, it's silk satin, whatever it is. So little advice there. But I would say there's when fabrics are made, they're woven together, right? And when you buy a piece of fabric, there's something called the selvage edge, which I'm going to show you a piece of fabric, and you can see this is just cut with scissors, 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 and then this is like a finished edge. So it might look like this, where there's like a different color there. It might look like this edge right here, where it's kind of frayed along one side, but then it's sealed. So that's your selvage edge. This edge won't fray. So it's kind of nice as an edging. You won't have to finish it. But what that tells you is that's the edge of the fabric. So when we look at a piece of fabric, there's basically non-stretch fabric, which means it has no give. So when I pull it, it's tight and there's just no give to it. If it's a stretch fabric, like this, then it's going to stretch either one side, but then not the other side, and that's a two-way stretch. Or it stretches like this is got a little bit of stretch, but not as much as this side. This is definitely the stretch side, and this side just has a little bit of stretch. So if I was using this material, and the selvage edge on stretch fabric usually rolls like this, but this would be the side that I would want to put width-wise because it's going to stretch around my body much better than this side. But in non-stretch fabrics, or back to this guy, there is something called the bias, and that's what bias tape is made out of. It's when you pull from corner to corner and you actually get a stretch. So it's because of the way it's woven. Those threads are woven across and vertically and diagonally. But when you pull it, or not diagonally, vertically and horizontally, when you pull it diagonally, you get some little stretch. So when you make bias tape, it's actually cut diagonally across a piece of fabric because it has a little bit of stretch, even though this material is not stretchy. But this is a little fabric jargon for you, some information about fabric in general when you're looking at a bolt of fabric. Bolts of fabric come in generally 45 inches wide, or 45 inches or 60 inches. Usually apparel fabrics are 60 inches and quilting fabrics are smaller, but that doesn't mean that you can't use quilting fabrics for apparel. You just have to know that you're probably going to have to buy more of a shorter bolt as opposed to a taller bolt of fabric. So I would suggest as a beginner, if you're just beginning sewing, to stick to more cottons. Cotton is inexpensive, it's easy to find and easy to work with. It's breathable, it's very friendly to everybody. It's a really great starting fabric to practice on, to make mock-ups, to do muslins, all that sort of stuff. The only bad thing about it is you do have to pre-shrink it. So because cotton shrinks when it's exposed to heat, you're going to want to pre-wash your cottons before you use them or cut them, because if you do all of your sewing and you cut all of the pieces and then you wash that piece, or even in steaming it or using steam with an iron, you can shrink that fabric a little bit and then you might have issues with fitting. So make sure you pre-wash. And honestly, you probably want to pre-wash most of your fabrics unless it's like a silk or something that's just not machine washable, because oftentimes fabrics come with some sort of coating or they might have some sort of finish on them that you might want to get off before you use it. So it's always kind of a good idea to pre-wash fabrics before you use them. If you are doing like a fancy or more formal costume, satin is definitely your way to go. For satin, polyesters are super easy to find. I know in Arizona, we have a bunch of fabric places called SAS or SAS. And they've got huge bolts of satin for like $2.99, $3.99, $4.99 a yard. So if you're looking to make a bigger dress and you're trying to do it on a budget, like stuff like that is really great. And hello, cool gamers, nice to see you. So that's what I would suggest, polyester satins. And we virtually look at, I know sometimes we can get super obsessed with fabrics, and I would love to make everything from silk, but silk's expensive and there's nothing wrong with trying to find a cheaper alternative. There's some great polyester satins out there that are beautiful. It's just looking at the type of weave it is and the kind of finish that it has. So just the other day, I went to SAS and I got a couple of satins, and I got this beautiful blue satin, and it has a nice sheen to it. It has a nice weight, and I think this is perfect for what I'm using it for. And it was $4.99 a yard. For $3.99 a yard, you can get a stiffer satin. This is more like a taffeta kind of fabric, so it's a little bit stiffer. It doesn't have as much of a shine, but a little bit of a shine. But again, this is polyester. So, and this was $3.99 a yard. So you can get decent fabrics for decent prices. And there's lots of fabric stores online. What I really love that a lot of fabric stores online are doing now is filming videos of them moving the fabric around. And that really gives you a nice idea of what that fabric looks like. Because I know I've had so many times where I've ordered fabric online and it's not quite the color that I want or the drape that I want, and that's really hard to discover online. So that's why if you can buy locally, try to do that. Some other advice I would give is when you're using materials to make a mock-up, or so you're practicing your design, you want to make sure that it looks the way you want it to look before you finish it, right? So you're doing a mock-up, a fake version of it. So if you are using stretch fabric, and I used to do this multiple times and it really works against you. But find a material that is the same stretch as your actual material. So if we go back to like this stretchy piece of material, this has a lot of stretch, right? So much. If I do my mock-up in a different stretch material because I found something that's cheap and similar, but it doesn't have the same amount of stretch, then my mock-up is not going to work. It's going to look different. So make sure that you're using the same amount of stretch in your mock-up as you are for your finished fabric so that it looks the same. Because if it's not as stretchy, it's going to look different. If your mock-up material is way stretchier, then it's definitely going to be a problem because your original material won't stretch as much. So kind of keep that in mind. And I do a lot of demos and panels about patterning. And I just wanted to show you on a lot of stretch patterns where it's meant for stretchy material, they'll have something on the back of the pattern that looks kind of like this. This is a vintage pattern, but it's still on today's patterns, where it will say, for this pattern, 4-inch of knit fabric, much stretch crosswise from here to at least here. So it tells you how stretchy your fabric has to be. So this is really helpful. If you're buying a pattern that is meant for stretch fabrics, it will tell you how stretchy it needs to be, and you can take that fabric and stretch it and make sure that it works. So just kind of a fun tip for patterning. So I'm super obsessed with textiles, and there's lots of different kinds of fabric. We would never have enough time to go through different kinds of fabric. There's sheer fabrics, which sheer fabrics and stretch fabrics can be difficult for beginners because there's a little bit of a trick to them. But I promise practicing makes perfect. Just keep on using them and keep practicing with them. On my Patreon, there's a whole bunch of stuff about sewing, but there's also a lot about fabric. So in this issue here, it talks about the right fabric and different kinds of fabric. And so it talks about stretch fabrics, sheer fabrics, velvets, and corduroy. And how do you know what is the right fabric for your cosplay or for your project? So you have to think about characteristics. What are you trying to make? And look for similar items in stores. What are they made of? And find something similar. For jackets, you're going to want to look for different suitings, maybe twills, something that's has a little bit more weight. If you're using a really lightweight fabric for a jacket and you're trying to make like a very structured, like military style jacket or something, the look isn't going to be quite there because the fabric itself is just too light. Think about weather. Is it going to be warm or cold? And so if you find something, pay attention to what that fabric is called and what the washing instructions are for that fabric. And research. Look what other people have used for that particular cosplay, or what they have done, and do you like how that looks or not? So sometimes we can choose something because we love how it looked on this person, or because we hated how that looked and we want to do something different. So that can help you make up your mind about what you want to use. And make a mock-up. So find that similar fabric that you'll be using and then create a mock-up so that you know what it will look like in that kind of fabric. We don't always have the time to do that. I wish we did. But if you have the time, it will always help you make your costume better to try and do a mock-up. That helps with fit, that helps with decisions on what fabric to use or what details to do, how hard it's going to be for you, all that sort of stuff. You might want to make adjustments for that. So that really helps out. If you want to know a lot more about fabric, and I couldn't find the one I made in textile school or my textile class, but I did find one of my books. And I usually bring this to my fabric panels when I do a panel about fabric. This is called Fabric for Fashion, the swatch book. It's not cheap. It's like $69 on Amazon, but I've had it for years. And basically, this is a swatch book. So not only does it talk about the different types of fabrics, how they're woven, what weaves are, all that beautiful stuff here, but as we get farther along, it actually has swatches of the fabric. So let me get to a page that's not so white here, so you can actually see the colors. But so it has swatches that you can feel, and they're labeled as to what they are, so that you can get a better idea of what that fabric is going to feel like, what it's going to act like. And it gives you all this information about those different kinds of fabrics. I think this is just such a great resource and so much knowledge in this book. It talks about natural fibers versus non-natural fibers. It has all the stretch, cotton, wool, denims, all of that. So it really goes into all the different kinds of things. They even have bamboo, silk. So you can really get an idea of what kinds of materials you're looking for. And fun fact, I made one of these when I was in my textile class. And as you're going along your sewing journey and you discover fabrics that you really like, cut out a swatch, create a book, like a binder, and label those swatches. And you can make your own textile book, your own textile reference book. Okay, so because there's fabrics that I love, I love silk dupioni. I love bridal satins. I know that about myself. But this really helps me kind of think outside the box and look at other things and think, oh, actually, this would be really great for that. I don't have to, do it out of silk. I don't have to. So yeah, Jessica says that she made a sample binder, but this one's already has it. Yeah, I know. If you don't want to go through the trouble, then this book is for you. My binder from class had like hundreds of samples in it, so it was a little more than I needed, but this one's really fun too. And there are other books just about fabric, and I do find those to be helpful, but I like this one because it actually has stuff you can touch and feel. And I feel like that's very important, to be able to touch and to feel your fabrics. It just really helps you out. One of the things that I noticed in judging and cosplaying is a lot of times we are afraid to challenge accuracy, and that can be a preference. I'm not saying that you have to judge accuracy or you have to change it, but I do like when people will choose a slightly patterned fabric, and I don't mean pattern of different color, but like a jacquard, or I wish I had something kind of close by that I could show you. Here's something like this, where it's the color, but it also kind of has like this, this pattern to it underneath. And I really feel like in a lot of instances when you're doing fan art or original designs or like Gajinka designs, things like that really make your costume stand out and give it more texture, and but it's still the right color. So I love it when people do that, when they kind of shift textile patterns or ideas. Maybe they'll use velvet or something a little bit maybe that you wouldn't think of to really make it pop. And I think that's really fun to play with the texture of textiles. The other thing is that just because something, and someone asked about build books, and I'll get to that in a second. The other thing is using a fabric just because it's the right color can also be damaging. So sometimes we find something that is like the perfect color, but we shouldn't be trying to use like a heavy denim twill to make a light summer dress just because it's the right color. Because one, it's going to be heavy, and it's not going to have the same drape or the feel as the design. So I feel like sometimes it's okay to be just slightly off in color if the fabric choice is like the better choice. And that's just me as a person. You don't have to agree, but I find that it is noticeable when people use like definitely the wrong fabric for something. And you know what? There are ways to change fabrics to make them better. So for lightweight satins, you can interface the whole piece. I've seen it done and it's beautiful to make it stiffer and more structured. So interfacing is a great thing. We can talk about that in another episode. But you can use interfacing to change the drape and the weight of fabrics to make them work better for you. So you can change fabrics to work better for you. But you can only do that to make them heavier and sturdier, not necessarily the opposite. You can't make heavy fabrics easier to drape. So someone asked about build books, and there's a couple things about build books. Like my biggest advice is I always put samples of my fabric in my build book because I want people to be able to touch them and feel them. If I dyed anything, I'll put a before and an after. And that's usually right in the front. So my fabric samples are like one of the first things that they can see. I generally, judges sometimes only have 3 minutes to look at build books. So here's an example of a build book I was working on that I haven't actually finished this costume, but here you can see the examples of the fabric. But judges generally only have like 3 minutes to look at your build book. So I think the more images and the less text, generally the better. I also use my build books as a way to keep myself in line. So I generally do sections. So my bodice will be 1 page, but it will be like a collage of images. And then at the bottom, a blurb of basic things that they should know about this bodice. And I'm also going to talk. So I'm going to give way more information than what's written there, but they can read that information. But chances are they're going to be looking and listening to you talk, and it's difficult to read and look and listen and do all of that at the same time. So the more images, I think, the better. It'll show your process more because they can see your finished result. So you want to show them the process. So you want to show each little thing. And we want to show details and some of those smaller things that you worked really hard on that might not be obvious and might not be seen. Those are the things you really want to point out, your processes. So then you just go through bodice, skirt, cape, prop, wig, have a page for each thing. And so make a collage image for all of that. So it's not like 6 pages because unfortunately they're not going to have the time to go through. When you're entering as a master level or a professional level, there's a ridiculous amount of things that you've done to your costume, and it's hard to get through that in 3 minutes. So you're going to succinctly put it in there. And I think you should make multiple copies so that you can hand them to several judges at once so that they don't have to pass it around. Everybody can look at it at the same time. And I make sure that you are referencing things in the build book as you're talking so that they can keep up with you and see what you're talking about as you're talking about it. So I think that's most of my advice on build books. Sometimes they'll keep them, sometimes they'll give them back, but if you want it back, then you have to make sure that you ask if you can have it back, or if they want to keep it, sometimes they'll want to keep it for references. So, but that's my advice for build books. I have another, so going back to fabric, on my Patreon, I actually have a huge guide to fabrics. It's about 6 pages, and it goes through all of the different fabrics so that you can kind of get an idea of the weight, like what they're usually used for, all those sort of different things, and get a feel for different fabrics if you're interested. So that's on my Patreon, and you can go through, it's alphabetized, and go through it and look. And that way it'll kind of give you more feel on the different kinds of fabrics and what you might want to use. There's also with sewing different threads for different fabrics. So a lot of times, if you're using a cotton, you're going to want to use a cotton thread. If you're using a polyester, you want to use a polyester thread. If you're using silk, they have silk threads. So you can kind of match your thread to your fabric, and that will give you a better experience. I'm not saying that you can't use a polyester on a silk or whatever. I mean, like I've done that and it's okay. But it's better to use the matching thread with the matching material. And that just, it just sews better, easier. You don't get snags, all that sort of stuff. So that's my advice for that. Sorry, a little congested up here. So that's about everything I think I have basically about fabric. I mean, I could go on for a really long time. It's very important to iron your fabric before you use it. Make sure that it is flat, and also make sure that you are cutting your pieces perpendicular or parallel to the selvage edge. So you can't cut pieces like this, and then suddenly cut a piece this way on your big piece of fabric. Because if there is any difference in stretch, think about like this material. If I cut 3 pieces on this width, so it's stretched like this, and then I cut one the opposite way, I'm going to have 1 piece that barely stretches and then 3 that are super stretchy. And then you're just going to have 1 piece of your costume that doesn't stretch. So make sure that all of your pieces are the same way, and make sure that they are 90 degrees from the selvage edge. So you can literally just take a ruler and make sure that you have a 90-degree angle from the edge there. And that will just help you avoid any weird change in the weave. If you're even a little bit off, then you might have a little bit of that bias stretch in there, and that will affect the way that it fits and the way that it goes together. So just something to keep in mind there. And I think that's all I wanted to say in this episode about fabric. If you guys have interest in knowing more, like there's a lot about stretch fabrics I could talk about. There's a lot about formal wear fabrics that I could talk about, and corsetry and the specialty fabrics that you use for that. So if there is something that you're super interested in knowing or having an episode on, please let us know so that I can do that episode for you. I used to have like 8 huge tubs of fabric. I was literally obsessed with collecting fabric. And right now I'm kind of just down to my Lolita fabric and all of my silks and my specialty like cotton fabrics and stuff like that, which is still probably too much fabric, but I've cut down a lot. And so I have a whole bunch of these beautiful Japanese silks too, which are really pretty. And you know, we have certain ideas like about wool and silks, and silk is actually can be quite warming. It actually keeps heat in with you, and different weaves and have different properties. So these silks are they have a lot more structure to them rather than like a silk satin, which is very flowy. And when we think about wools, we usually think about like felt, like wool felt, like really thick, heavy wool. But wool can also be lightweight too. So there's just a lot of differences in fabric. And the more you learn about it, the better you are able to manipulate it and use it. So I definitely suggest you looking into all the different fabrics that you love and kind of learning more about them and how you can manipulate them and make them do what you want. Because that's what, you know, sewing and cosplay is all about, is figuring out how to, you know, make everything just exactly how you want it to look for your preferences. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here in a minute, but if you, they put my Patreon in the comments and my Instagram. If you have questions, you can always message me on Instagram and I'll respond and do the best I can to answer your questions. If you have suggestions for a future episode, throw those at me too on Instagram. I appreciate all of you watching and asking questions. And I hope that you learned something new or that I piqued your interest and you're going to go now look at some fabric. And I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me. And thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Okay? Bye.